Hey everyone, welcome to the channel for another Escape from Tarkov video. In this one, I'll be going over my top 3 low recoil AK builds of the 0.12 patch, covering all the price ranges, a budget option, a mid-tier setup, and the best in slot recoil focused build. The idea with these builds is to show 2 budget conscious setups that aim to get the highest amount of recoil reduction per money spent, and to compare these to the most expensive best in slot build that you can put together for the AK. One of the great things about AKs in Escape from Tarkov is that you don't have to spend a fortune to knock the recoil down by a pretty good amount, as there are quite a few relatively cheap attachments with great recoil reduction. As a disclaimer though, I'll just say that these setups are aimed at people who are actually looking to build up an AK, not just trying to make the cheapest build possible. If you're looking for that, just run a plain AK with iron sights, because there's no magic solution to upgrade a weapon without spending a little bit of cash. My idea of a budget build is to get the best stat upgrades possible at a reasonable price, so that's what I went for with these setups. I'll be using the 545 AKs as a base for these builds, but you can easily convert them to use on a 762 AK by just changing the muzzle device, and I'll be sure to point out which one you should use for those builds as well. I should also mention that I'm going with the older model AKs, the AK-74, 74N, AKM, and AKMN as the base on these setups, because they allow you to use better stocks, and on the 762 AKs, better muzzle devices compared to the newer models. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at these builds, starting with the budget focused setup. For my budget AK setup this patch, I've had a lot of success using a fairly simple build that takes advantage of some extremely cost-effective attachments to pile on as much recoil reduction as possible for as cheap as possible. It's actually pretty much a fully built rifle, with a new muzzle device, handguard, foregrip, and red dot sight. But really the only 2 attachments that are even remotely expensive are the compensator and the red dot sight. Starting from the front, one of the key attachments for a recoil-focused AK build is the muzzle device, and for the 545 AKs, it's hard to beat the PWS CQB compensator, sold by Skier level 3 for about 12,000 rubles. This gives you 11% recoil reduction, which is pretty huge for a single attachment, but can sometimes be out of stock and really expensive on the flea market. If that's the case, you can try out the DTK1 or SRVV compensator instead. If you're building a 762 AK, you'll want the Venom Antidote compensator from Skier level 3 or the Lantak Dragon from Skier level 4. Both of these are around 12,000 rubles and give you some great recoil reduction. Next, one of my favorite new attachments for the AK in the 0.12 patch is the AK100 series polymer handguard, which you can get at proper level 1 for a measly 1,300 rubles, and it lets you attach a foregrip and a light to any AK. For my budget foregrip option, I personally really like the Zenit RK0 grip, sold by Skier level 3 for about 7,000 rubles. As far as I know, this is the cheapest foregrip in the game that gets you above 2% recoil reduction, so I add that one onto the handguard for this build. Now there's really only 2 things left on this build, a red dot sight and a small upgrade to the stock. For the sight, it's quite cheap to just add the TT01 rear sight adapter and put a small red dot on top of this. You can get the adapter for about 2,800 rubles at proper level 2, and for this build, I just used a PK06 sight. The PK06 is about 16,000 rubles from Jaeger level 2, but you can add other red dot sights to this adapter as well if you have a certain preference. Finally, the last piece of this build is the GP25 recoil pad on the basic AK stock, which gets you a nice added bonus to recoil reduction for only about 3,000 rubles. For the overall stats on this setup, I got the recoil down to 68 on the AK-74 and 98 on the AKM with this build, with around 48 ergonomics. Keep in mind that your numbers might vary a little bit since my recoil control skill is around level 30. If you pick up the rifle for around 30,000 rubles on the flea market, this whole setup only runs around 72,000 rubles total if everything else is purchased from the traders. While this build might not work for cross-map full auto sprays, I think the stats are pretty good for the money that's invested into it. I especially like using this setup for throwaway runs, like rushing to take down Killa on interchange over and over again, because I can build several of them and not worry too much about the price if I lose them, but I still have a fairly well-performing rifle and I can use good ammo to get past armor. Next up is a mid-tier recoil-focused build, and personally, I think the mid-tier builds are where the AK really shines in Escape from Tarkov, because you can bring down the recoil by a very significant amount using fairly moderately priced attachments. That being said, this mid-tier build essentially just upgrades a few main pieces of the budget setup to bring down the recoil by another pretty big margin, while trying to keep the cost pretty reasonable as well. For the muzzle device, I stick with the same one as the last build, either the PWS CQB compensator for the 545 AKs or the Venom Antidote or Lantac Draken for the 762 AKs. Alternatively, if you want to suppress this build, I would recommend the PBS-4 or PBS-1 suppressors, both of which can be found for about 30,000 rubles on the flea market, since overall they have the best recoil reduction for suppressed AK builds. For the handguard, I think the CAA RS-47 handguard is one of the best options for AKs if you're talking about cost effectiveness. It gives 2% recoil reduction, has a decent ergonomics boost, and comes with 4 rails attached, which saves you money and time when making the build. You can get this handguard for about $100 from Peacekeeper Level 2, which is a pretty good price considering it adds recoil reduction and 4 rails. Next, I go for the Zenit RK1 foregrip on this setup, which is a bit of a step up from the last build and can sort of be considered an optional upgrade. This foregrip is sold by Skier Level 3 for about 17,000 rubles and gives you 4% recoil reduction. I say it's an optional upgrade because you're paying almost triple what you would for the RK0, but only for 1 extra % of recoil reduction. With that being said, I figure if you're looking to cut 10k from the overall cost on this setup without losing much performance, running the RK0 grip instead is a pretty good compromise. For the sight, I just went with the exact same setup as the last build, a TT01 rear sight adapter with a PK06 red dot, but again, use whatever sight you're most comfortable with. The next big change in this build over the pure budget setup is the stock, which is swapped with the Zhukov S stock, about $180 from Peacekeeper Level 4. This stock is actually the sole reason that older model AKs are better than the new ones in Escape from Tarkov, in my opinion. This stock gives an incredible 49% recoil reduction and 11 ergonomics points, making it by far the best stock option overall for recoil-focused AK builds. Finally, the last thing I add onto this build is an upgraded pistol grip for the ergonomics boost. The Magpul MOE grip is both the best option and fairly cheap at only 7,500 rubles from Mechanic Level 3, so I go with that one. For the overall stats on this build, I got the recoil down to 53 on the AK-74 and 74 recoil on the AKM, with around 60 ergonomics on each, which is actually only a few points away from the stats on the best in slot recoil setup, while being significantly cheaper. If you get the rifle for about 30,000 rubles on the flea market, this build will run you roughly 116,000 rubles altogether if you purchase everything else from the traders. Considering this setup is only 6 points away from the best in slot recoil build, while being about 50,000 rubles cheaper, I'd say a mid-tier AK setup like this is definitely among the most cost-effective assault rifle builds in the game. Before I move on to the best in slot build, I just want to mention that for a very modest extra bit of cash, you can add a hybrid sight combo to this build on the AK-74N and AKMN that I use very heavily in the mid game. All you need is an MPR-45 mount from Peacekeeper Level 2 and a PSO 4x scope from Proper Level 1. Move the PK06 onto the MPR-45 and attach the PSO scope to the receiver, and now you have a 4x and red dot combo for only about 18,000 rubles extra. Lastly, for this video, I want to go over what I would consider the current best in slot recoil build for the AK, both to show you how to build it and to show that despite all of the extra cost, it actually isn't that much better than a mid-range modded AK with a good selection of parts. Starting from the front, again I am going with the same muzzle devices from the last two builds, either a PWS CQB compensator for the 545 AKs or the Antidote or Draken compensator for 762 AKs. Same options for suppressors as well, either the PBS-4 or PBS-1 for the maximum recoil reduction. The handguard here is seeing a major upgrade to the VLTOR CMRD handguard, sold for about 32,000 rubles at Mechanic Level 4. This handguard adds 5% recoil reduction, the best in slot for AKs, and needs key mod rails to add attachments. I chose the Zenit RK2 foregrip on this setup because it has the best in slot recoil reduction stats at 5%. This grip is sold for about 24,000 rubles at Skier Level 4 and comes with an ergonomics penalty. So to be honest, it's not a bad call to go with the RK1 grip I mentioned earlier instead because it has more balanced stats at a better price. Next, I swapped the basic dust cover for a Fab Defense PDC dust cover, adding some accuracy points, ergo points, and a top rail for mounting scopes. This dust cover will run you about 17,000 rubles from Skier Level 4. For the sight, you can run pretty much whatever you want on this dust cover, and I'll be pricing the build using a PK06 sight to stay consistent. But on this best in slot setup, I often prefer something like the Hammer or Valde scope just to make it more versatile, but this adds about 50,000 onto the total price tag. For the stock, again I'm running the Zhukov S stock, since it has the best recoil stats and a good ergonomics boost as well. And finally, once again I add the MOE AK pistol grip for an ergonomics boost, but I also like to add the RP1 charging handle, which gives you 1 ergonomics points for only about 3,000 rubles. That's about it for the attachments on this setup, and as you might already be able to tell, this build is quite a lot pricier than the others, while really only adding a few extra % of recoil reduction. For the overall stats on this build, I got the recoil down to 47 on the AK-74 and 65 on the AKM, which is pretty much as low as you can get on an AK when it comes to recoil. You'll notice that it's not really much lower than the mid-tier build though, so you're paying a high premium for that few extra points of recoil control. This build does get over 50 ergonomics with a 60 round mag attached, so that's a definite plus side to using this best in slot build, especially if you're running a magnified optic. The total cost for this build is around 167,000 rubles altogether, if all attachments are purchased from the traders and the rifle on the flea market. It's still definitely cheaper than a fully built M4, but a mid-tier AK build is definitely very cost effective compared to the best in slot setup. Well, that about covers it for these AK builds, and I hope you found the builds and the comparisons between them helpful. You can definitely dump a lot of cash into an AK swapping out parts, but as I hope this video shows, if you're smart about what parts you add, you can really knock down the recoil numbers without spending a fortune. I'm looking to do a video similar to this one for some other weapons in Escape from Tarkov as well, and I'm thinking the next ones will likely be for the M4A1 and SA58, going over a budget, mid-tier, and best in slot build for each. I'll be streaming more Escape from Tarkov on Twitch at twitch.tv/JDogTheWise, and it'd be great to have you drop by the stream, so I'll leave a link for that down in the description. Thanks for checking out the video. As always, feel free to leave any comments, corrections, or suggestions down below, and until next time, stay safe in Tarkov City.